and has published several important articles on Isaac Newton. One forthcoming in Philosophy of Science, or is it out? It just came out, so hot off the presses. You can get that on Newton's mechanical philosophy. And today she'll be talking about Newton's general scholium and the mechanical philosophy. So,
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. So first of all, I just wanted to thank all of the speakers for everything that I'm learning from your talks, and especially the speakers who are also the organizers for all the work, and also the funding bodies for making this opportunity possible. It's really an honor for me to be here. So I was asked to speak about Newton's general scholium and the mechanical philosophy, including the question of Newton's commitment to the 17th century mechanical philosophy in its dominant sense. I take that to be. The gravitational force seemed to imply unmediated action at a distance, and seems to conflict, therefore, with the dominant mechanical philosophy. Newton's theory faced a good deal of criticism from thinkers within that tradition, as we all know, some of it very harsh. And such criticism was, of course, in Newton's mind when he was revising for the second edition and writing his general scholium. And if he took a very measured tone, or rather measured tone, in the general scholium, we know that he was not faint-hearted in his counterattacks elsewhere. In light of this highly charged atmosphere, I thought I would begin with a brief observation. If we think of Newton's calculus and his gravitational theory, it seems that to have Newton's genius and without any of his personality would be a true intellectual heaven. But if we think then of his acrimonious disputes with contemporaries, how easily stung by criticism he was, and his obsessive drafting and redrafting of every sentence before exposing it to publication, it seems that to have Newton's personality and without any of his genius would surely be an intellectual hell. Is it hot in here, or is it just me? What I actually wanted to say is that since Ted McGuire is here, I would just like to acknowledge him as someone who has probably glimpsed more of intellectual heaven and seen further into Newton's mind than most of us probably ever could. So now, just to give a brief overview of the talk, in the first section, I just want to talk about Newton's commitment to the 17th century mechanical philosophy in this dominant sense. And I'll be focusing on the ontological requirement. We could distinguish an ontological and an intelligibility requirement. I won't be focusing on the intelligibility requirement. I would like to then, in the second section, discuss with respect to forces, which would be his fruitful departure from the ontological requirement, and stay focused in this section on his departure with respect to substance. I'll briefly mention an epistemological problem that arises from some speculations, but I want to mention here, and I'll re-emphasize it at the time, that there's no threat to Newton's method or his core ideas. I'm going to mention that problem simply as a reminder of Newton's intellectual landscape. In the second section, I want to talk about Newton's departure from the dominant mechanical philosophy with respect to his addition of impressed forces, which would, of course, be the highly fruitful departure. The main question, of course, will be in what sense, well, maybe it isn't of course, in what sense did Newton consider his own natural philosophy to be mechanical? And the answer, briefly alluded to, will be in one of the drafts for the general scholium. Then in the third section, I want to focus on the concept of matter figuring in Newton's mechanical philosophy, what I call his mechanical natural philosophy. That's a vast topic, and the focus within that is going to be something connected to a couple of the topics that Stephen asked me to speak about, spirits in space, and also connections between the general scholium and the gravitatione. And what I want to argue there, just for a brief preview, I'm going to look at the creation hypothesis's account of material bodies, and I'm going to argue that space or extension does not play the role that it first appears to play, and once we understand the actual role of space or extension, we'll see how fundamental law-governed action is to this concept of body. Okay, so this would be then the first section. So again, I mentioned this intelligibility requirement, restriction to contact action as a cause of change, but I won't be discussing that. We'll just be focused on the ontological requirement, restriction to matter and its properties, again, with the focus on Newton's departure with respect to substance. So a number of scholars, including Ted and also Alan Gabby, have identified a range of meanings of terms such as mechanical, mechanical cause, mechanical philosophy. And just to name a few of them, or list a few of them, dynamic conception of nature, conceptions in terms of immutable laws, non-qualitative explanations, treating the universe and its component parts as machines, mathematical representations of natural phenomena, and the exclusion of spirits or everything immaterial from the investigative domain. But of course, there was also a dominant sense, as we well know, prevailing usages of these terms, and a dominant conception of a mechanical philosophy, which I already noted. I'm just conceiving of, in terms of this ontological requirement, on the one hand, expressed by Boyle's slogan, matter and motion, and the intelligibility restriction to material contact action on the other. So concerning Newton's departure from the ontological requirement with respect to substances, although we could say many things about various concepts of matter that Newton might be working with, many questions associated with this, I think we can also say he worked largely within a corpuscularian tradition, but he does not pair that, as we know, with the dominant mechanical philosophy's ontological restriction to matter and its properties. And the most conspicuous departure with respect to substances, that is the well-known general Scholium remark about God, quoted frequently in this conference so far. To treat of God from phenomena is certainly part of natural philosophy. So for Newton, the boundaries of natural philosophy are determined by ontology, are not determined by ontology, but by method. And if we want to know if a given substance is admissible in natural philosophy, the answer is not going to depend upon the kind of substance per se, but upon the evidentiary source, whether there's any way of learning about it from phenomena via the five senses. So if a claim is grounded in revelation, it is part of religion, Newton writes in this unpublished preface, but a claim having exactly the same content would be part of natural philosophy if arrived at by experience. And that's so regardless of whether the claim's content is about material bodies, minds, or God. So we know that the general Scholium includes God in the domain of natural philosophy. Minds are mentioned in the speculative passage just quoted in various texts, or not many, but occasionally Newton speculates about some inanimate, immaterial spirits. It's not completely clear, at least not to me, whether the electrical spirit in the general Scholium, or I should say there, the very subtle spirit, known from other texts to be electrical, is immaterial, but at least one remark suggests that he may be conceiving of it that way. That would be the comparison to magnetism, with gravity and the electrical force grouped on one side, magnetism operating by material effluvia on the other. And then also in the unpublished letter to the Memoirs of Literature, responding to Leibniz's criticisms, Newton mentions a substance by which bodies move and float without resistance, and which therefore has no vis inertiae and acts by other laws than those that are mechanical. So we have some speculations about immaterial spirits. And of course, as we know, what makes Newton's admission of immaterial spirits into natural philosophy so interesting is that the spirits are spatially extended somehow, and he also allows the possibility that substances of different kinds might be in the same place at the same time. So, yes. So we have the well-known quote from De Gravitatione giving us the existence condition for substances, some manner of spatial location and presence, regardless of whether the substance is material or immaterial. And this is also implied by the passage from the General Scholium. And then we also have, in the same passage from the General Scholium, the implication of the actual co-presence of God with created substances. And in the one draft for the General Scholium, manuscript C, Newton suggests, in general terms, the epistemic possibility of co-presence with substances of different kinds, where he says that substances of different kinds do not penetrate each other, does not at all appear from the phenomenon. In the General Scholium, Newton's epistemology of substance also appears. We have access only to properties, not to innermost substances. I just would like to note, I don't see Newton as eliminating substance. This seems to reflect at least part of a long-standing view that comes much earlier in De Gravitatione, in the ontological view expressed there. As I interpret it, in any case, it's a reductive view of substance, but not an eliminative, not an eliminativist view. So then I just wanted to briefly mention an epistemological problem that I see from the combination of this epistemology of substance that we saw in the General Scholium, together with some of the speculative thoughts that appear in the unpublished texts, the possibility of different substances or substances of different kinds being in the same place at the same time. And I would like to mention, just in passing, this seems to be intended strictly, not in the sense that water fills the pores of a sponge, but really that the two things are in literally the same place at the same time. I don't know how else we could understand that when we consider, for example, that passage from the General Scholium. So the problem that I see is how then could one ever determine empirically which substance, body or spirit, for instance, owns the active power that Newton cites as gravity's cause, for example, in Query 31. Or more fundamentally, how would it be possible to determine empirically how many substances are present in a given place at a given time? It seems that once you allow the epistemic possibility that more than one substance could be in a given place at a given time, it's just not clear how you could determine how many substances to infer from those properties. Well, as I said in the introduction, because I really want to emphasize the point, this problem poses absolutely no threat whatsoever to Newton's method or his core ideas. Some of the source ideas that it arises from are speculative, and of course, a problem arising from speculation is going to inherit their tenuous status. I simply mention it because I think it reminds us of the risk of allowing immaterial spirits into natural philosophy, and it's a reminder that the exclusion of immaterial spirits from natural philosophy was not the foregone conclusion, that these were real struggles to define the limits of empiricism and to define an ontology. In section 2, as I said, I want to talk yet again about Newton's departure from the mechanical philosophy's ontology, but now with respect to his highly fruitful departure by adding impressed forces. Within the context of this question, in what sense did Newton consider his own natural philosophy to be a mechanical philosophy? So now on the one hand, it seems that Newton must have considered his natural philosophy to be mechanical in some sense, since he derives natural phenomena from mechanical principles, and since rational mechanics is the core of his natural philosophy. On the other hand, these terms, mechanical, mechanical cause, and especially mechanical philosophy, are strongly associated with the mechanical philosophy in its dominant sense, including, of course, the material contact action central to vortex theories. And Newton himself often uses the terms in that prevailing sense. So one of the best known examples comes again in the general Scholium when he describes gravity as a force acting not in proportion to the surfaces of the particles on which it acts, as mechanical causes are wont to do. And there are further quotes, of course, again in Query 28, the philosophers who explain everything mechanically are those hypothesis-feigning philosophers who insist upon dense matter. So to many ears, hearing these terms, especially mechanical philosophy, applied to Newton's own theory, might strike a discordant note. So what I want to do is mute that discordant note by providing some quotes from Newton where he's using these terms in connection with his own theory. One is from the Conclusio, and he's talking about the local motions of minute particles and forces in connection with the mechanical cause of things. Later in Query 28, despite having used the term mechanically in the prevailing sense, he's now talking about philosophy's main business as being that of unfolding the mechanism of the world. And then also the vis inertiae acts by those laws that are mechanical. And then I thought it was interesting that in one text, he actually applies the term mechanical to his own theory and laws. He's talking about the active principles responsible for law-governed motion and refers to these active principles that he's looking for as grounding somehow the law-governed motions as the genuine principles of the mechanical philosophy. I have to acknowledge this is in a passage that he did cross out, but I think it shows that it's not as if this term was bound or fixed to the dominant sense of the mechanical philosophy in his mind. He also allowed for a sense that was applicable to his own theory. So what is that sense? Well, I think manuscript C for the general Scholium gives us at least a glimpse of it. He says that he conceives of the natural world as a divinely created machine. Do I have that on the next slide? Oh, yes. So here, the world is a machine, and God is the mechanic. To set up so accurately a machine of so many bodies at such great distances requires consummate power, we find in this draft for the general Scholium. And God is the perfect mechanic. This recalls the author's preface, which sets out his view of how he understands his own theory as mechanical in far greater detail, and unifies natural philosophy with mechanics. Anyone who works with less exactness is a more imperfect mechanic, and if anyone could work with the greatest exactness, he would be the most perfect mechanic of all. This might be an indirect allusion, but it has more explicit cousins. In one of the letters to Bentley, Newton describes God as a cause not blind and fortuitous, but very well skilled in mechanics and geometry. So one of the meanings of mechanical and mechanical philosophy mentioned earlier was the treatment of the universe and its systems as machines. And of course, if we think of machines such as a pulley or a balance, we can readily understand why some early modern thinkers, especially those on the lookout for some sort of alternative to scholastic approaches to nature, saw machines as offering some sort of promising alternative approach. If we look at a pulley, we see that its operation depends upon the contact of the rope against the wheels. If we use a lever to move a heavy body, we notice we don't have to apply much effort if we put the body close to the fulcrum and push from a good distance away. And the features that seem to attract our attention are efficient causes. So I think we're naturally led to think in terms of efficient causes more than in terms of final ones, especially in terms of interdependent parts. A change in one part of the pulley is both dependent upon and productive of change in another part. So instead of thinking in terms of individual bodies and powers belonging to each body, we're led to think in terms of a system of covariant parameters of change among interdependent parts. And also we're struck by mathematical principles, the mathematical expressibility of the operative principles, especially if we had access to the right texts or were smart enough to figure them out on our own, and if we learned Archimedes' law of the lever. So Newton will draw both mathematical and realist lessons from this tradition. Not everyone did. Boyle tended to be struck more by other features in machines, the shapes and sizes of parts. Some looked at the mathematical expressibility and continued to insist upon a distinction between natural philosophy as seeking causes and mechanics as not. But Newton drew both realist and mathematical lessons, I think. So once again, I see this as summed up in a way by the description of the world as a machine. Newton is seeing geometric proportions as intrinsic to causal principles. This underwrites the union of natural philosophy with mechanics. This is not the use of mechanics, the use of the mathematical approach adopted from the simple machine tradition is not the application of something foreign to sensible objects. It's a matter of eliciting the geometrical proportions intrinsic to them. Another fundamental feature is that these forces can't be localized to individual bodies, and they arise only within a system. And finally, realism as being another fundamental feature of this. The mathematically expressible forces are real causes of phenomena. And again, this underwrites the union of mechanics and natural philosophy. And of course, this is one of the best known lines expressing what many people see as Newton's realism about force, that gravity really exists. So just to then mention the connection that I see to natural philosophy's traditional goal, I see Newton as retaining natural philosophy's traditional goal, which would be generally stated to discover the forces, to discover real causes of phenomena. So I see Newton as affirming natural philosophy's traditional goal, but specifying it in a crucially new way. So the Peripatetics had specified it in terms of their four causes. Descartes had specified it in terms of the material contact action sense of mechanism, and Newton now is specifying the general goal as the discovery of impressed forces. So as I understand this sense in which Newton saw his philosophy as a mechanical natural philosophy, while gravity was at odds with the dominant mechanical philosophy, it's the best exemplar of a mechanical philosophy in Newton's own sense. So part 3, now I just want to talk a little bit or say something about the concept of matter figuring in this mechanical natural philosophy of Newton's. Once again, that's a vast topic, and the focus will be one aspect of Newton's concept of matter connected to a couple of the topics Stephen asked me to address, spirits in space, and connections between the general scholium and the gravitatione. And the focus will be an ontological aspect of the account of body developed in the creation hypothesis. De gravitatione gives us an account of body, which is part of an account of substance generally. And there it has both ontological and epistemological components. Just to tie this to the general scholium, because I'll be talking mainly about the gravitatione in this section. In the general scholium, we get the epistemological component of this account. The claim we saw earlier that we have no access to innermost substances, but I think we also get some aspect of the ontological component with respect to God, though not generally. So my main goal here in this section is to argue that the actual role of extension in its account is very different from what it might appear to be. And once we understand the actual role, once again, we'll see how fundamental law-governed action is to the concept of body. And I want to mention here, it's of course not controversial that the creation story takes bodies to be law-governed. I certainly want to acknowledge that. This is known. I simply want to say that I think misunderstanding the role of space obscures just how fundamental law-governed action is in that account. And then I want to mention a couple of implications. Okay. So as I understand this creation hypothesis, there are two stages. Newton first imagines God creating some new entity, some impenetrable region above the earth. This is familiar to all of us, something like a mountain, and it is not mobile at this stage. But if we think about what he says about its impenetrability, actually he's imagining a world in which bodies already exist. Because he says it would be impenetrable because things would impinge against it. Well, of course they could impinge against it only if they move against it. So this seems to be a world that already contains bodies, and of course those bodies are presumed to be mobile. It's only at the second stage of the hypothesis that Newton imagines the new entity to be mobile. And it seems at this point he's focusing on this entity. There may not be any other bodies, or any bodies existing. So the addition of mobility to this new entity is, I claim, the crucial addition that enables Newton to say that the new entity is a body. Previously, in stage 1, it was not. These beings will either be bodies or very similar to bodies. Once again, that's the epistemological point. We can't say what bodies really are, but we can talk about those things that have all the properties which would make these entities indistinguishable to us from bodies that we know. So again, Newton is now supposing that the bodies, that the new entities are able to be moved from place to place, that they have the ability to reflect and be reflected, and this is sufficient for him now to say they qualify as bodies. There at the end of that quote, he says, there will be no property of bodies, a body now which it does not possess, and he lists the properties. And this enables him to give this definition. I won't read it all out. It's familiar to people. As we know from this definition, determined quantities of extension figure very prominently in them. He sets this out initially, and then he gives the conditions of mobility of impenetrability or mutual impenetrability of these entities, that they obstruct their mutual motions reflected in accordance with certain laws, and of course that they have the ability to stimulate perceptions in perceivers. So at first glance, it might seem that these determined quantities of extension or regions of actual space that God has turned into bodies by modifying them, by somehow solidifying them, making them mutually impenetrable, mobile, and able to cause perceptions. But if we recall some of the features of space, I think there's good reason to think that this is not so. I won't go through this since I think it's quite familiar. I'll just move on to say, I think that to suppose that God is creating bodies, or Newton thinks that God is creating bodies by solidifying or modifying regions of space, conflicts with what he has said about space. He has said it's eternal, immutable, immobile, unable to produce effects, and that it has parts that are indistinguishable, but indivisible. To suppose that bodies are divinely modified regions of space would directly conflict with this description of space by implying that space is not eternal, because some parts of it are turned into bodies, that it is not immutable because some parts become impenetrable and able to produce sensations, and that the distinguishable parts of space are not immobile and not indivisible because some parts could be made impenetrable and torn away. There are some additional conceptual problems with the interpretation. If some parts of space could be torn away, we must wonder what would be left in their place. Would space be left with gaps? And what would happen then? Two final considerations I want to mention. Although Newton is very concerned with the empirical grounds of bodies throughout this hypothesis, he also spends quite a bit of time emphasizing and explaining that unlike Descartes and unlike the scholastics, his account of body affirms three truths of metaphysics. And the second of those truths is that God created bodies ex nihilo. But this metaphysical truth that God has created bodies from nothing would conflict with Newton's claim that space is something because it has properties. It is not nothing. And then finally, in his definition, if we recall condition one, he clarifies. He says, therefore, I did not say they are numerical parts of space which are absolutely immobile, but only definite quantities which may be transferred from space to space. I think he's telling us that determined quantities of extension are just that. They are quantities. And we know a quantity is not identical to a region of space itself. Different regions of space may have the same volume. So in my view, Newton is giving a reductive account of body in which the body consists in powers, mobile sets of powers of impenetrability and ability to produce sensation in perceivers, which are united simply by divine action. I think this is a general account. The account of body is part of a broader account. It's a similar account for God and for minds. So the concept of spirit is the conceptual ancestor of the creation hypothesis's account of body. So just then quickly to mention some implications. Space in this interpretation becomes the only thing that is extended in the sense of having parts outside parts, by which I mean quantitative parts that could be mapped onto what are at least phenomenally experienced as the divisible parts of bodies. Substances, including material bodies, are extended in only the derivative sense that the powers that they consist in are present in some extension. So bodies don't have parts outside parts. Even bodies are extended in only this derivative sense. I think that once we see that extension's role is only to temporarily house the properties in which the bodies consist, we can see how fundamental to the creation hypothesis' account of body this law-governed action is. And then there's finally, excuse me, just to mention one final implication. As I understand this, because bodies do not have parts outside parts, on this account, it would not be too difficult to imagine the powers in which a body consists as being present in a larger or smaller region of space, even as being contracted to a point. So as I interpret this account, it does not pose any obstacle to Newton's later realization that one could consider mass as being concentrated at a point. Thank you.